Sometimes disappointment arrives quietly, settling into the space where hope briefly lived. Elias Monroe had learned to recognize that quiet. It was the same stillness that followed unanswered messages and polite goodbyes, the kind that asked nothing from him yet took something anyway. As a single father, he had trained himself to move carefully through emotional terrain, not because he lacked feeling, but because he carried more than his own. Years after a marriage that ended without drama but with lasting absence, Elias had grown practiced at self-containment, telling himself that resilience meant not expecting too much. Tonight he had allowed a small expectation to surface, and he felt it recede even as the evening continued. The restaurant was warm and well lit, designed for conversation, yet the table felt like neutral ground neither side wished to claim. Across from Elias sat the woman he had met through a friend's careful matchmaking, someone whose smile arrived on time but never stayed. Their plates had been cleared, and the pause that followed stretched without direction. He noticed how often they reached for water, how their eyes lingered on anything but each other. The blind date had not failed loudly or abruptly, it was dissolving through distance, through the absence of ease that should have grown instead of retreated. Elias understood before his body reacted. The evening was ending emotionally long before it would end physically, and that realization settled into him with practiced calm. He did not feel anger or embarrassment, only a familiar resignation. He catalogued the signs the way one learns to read weather, the shortened answers, the polite nods, the way hope withdrew without announcement. He reminded himself that endurance was his strength, that disappointment no longer surprised him, even as it continued to find him. A few tables away his daughters sat together, pretending to be absorbed in dessert they had already finished. Lily, the older one, had inherited his attentiveness, while Mara watched the room with quiet intensity. They were there because babysitters were expensive, and because Elias believed honesty mattered, even when it was inconvenient. The girls did not intrude, but they noticed. Children always did. They sensed emotional shifts adults tried to hide, registering tension not through words, but through atmosphere. Elias felt their awareness like a gentle weight, not accusatory, just present. The woman across from him, Naomi Hart, was kind in the careful way of someone protecting old wounds. Her posture remained composed, her expressions considerate but distant, as if she had learned that distance was safer than disappointment. Loneliness had shaped her politeness, smoothing her edges until nothing sharp remained. Elias could see that she was not unkind or uninterested in connection, only tired of misalignment. They shared that fatigue without naming it, two people pausing at the edge of something neither believed would hold. As the silence grew, it widened the space between them, turning the table into a reminder rather than a bridge. Elias felt the emotional gap expand, not through conflict but through mutual withdrawal. He noticed how easily he accepted it, how quickly he reverted to the belief that connection was no longer meant for him. His life had become defined by staying when others left, by building a steady world for his daughters without expecting anyone else to choose it with him. That belief had kept him functional, but it had also kept him alone. Yet even in that acceptance, something quieter stirred. Elias watched his daughters laugh softly at something unspoken between them, their shared understanding forming a small, resilient unit. They were his chosen family as much as his biological one, partners in endurance who offered unexpected kindness without condition. Their presence reminded him that being chosen did not always arrive through romance or status, but through constancy. Hope, he realized, did not announce itself loudly either. It waited, persistent, for moments of recognition. Naomi gathered her things with gentle efficiency, and Elias mirrored the motion, aware that endings did not require ceremony. As they stood, he felt the familiar pull toward retreat, toward emotional safety. But he also felt something else, a reminder that redemption did not require perfection, only openness. He did not know what would come next, only that the evening had changed him in small, honest ways. The daughter sensed the moment slipping away. Repeated rejection convinces people that hope is reckless. Elias Monroe had not always believed that. There was a time when he thought effort guaranteed outcome, when showing up fully meant someone would meet him halfway. That belief had quietly dissolved years earlier, not through betrayal or conflict, but through emotional abandonment that arrived without warning and stayed without explanation. His marriage had, ended not in anger, but in absence, a slow retreat that left him holding responsibility, while connection slipped away. The separation taught him that love could leave even when no one was cruel, and that lesson reshaped the way he approached everything that followed. Single parenthood narrowed his expectations in ways he never admitted out loud. Love became something theoretical, a concept he respected but did not plan for. His life reorganized itself around school schedules, grocery lists, and the quiet discipline of consistency. Every decision passed through the filter of what his daughters needed, leaving little space for what he wanted. Over time, wanting felt indulgent, even irresponsible. Elias learned to call that restraint maturity, convincing himself that realism was simply adulthood's final form. That was why blind dating felt less like a beginning and more like a conclusion. Agreeing to it had been an act of closure, a way to prove he had tried one last time. He told himself that whatever happened would confirm what he already knew, that second chances were for people with lighter histories and fewer obligations. The evening had not disappointed him so much as validated him, reinforcing the idea that hope, when repeated too often, lost its credibility. Emotional self-protection became his most reliable skill, carefully disguised as practicality. Elias did not avoid connection because he feared rejection. He avoided it because he believed rejection was inevitable. By lowering expectations, he avoided the sharp edges of longing. He framed his guardedness as wisdom, ignoring the quiet cost of living without anticipation. It was easier to believe that something was not meant for him than to admit he still wanted it. The exhaustion of balancing fatherhood and loneliness weighed on him more heavily than he allowed himself to feel. His days were full, yet his nights carried a different kind of emptiness, one not filled by responsibility or routine. He stayed because staying was what he did, what he had always done. When others left, he remained, building a stable world out of persistence rather than optimism. That endurance became his identity, admired by others but isolating in its constancy. His daughters had grown up watching that restraint, learning emotional cues from what he withheld as much as what he provided. They saw his steadiness, his reliability, and the way he rarely spoke about himself. Without realizing it, they became emotional gatekeepers, attuned to the subtle shifts in his mood, protective in ways children often are when adults refuse vulnerability. They learned early that silence could mean disappointment, and they filled those spaces with their own interpretations. Elias believed he was teaching them strength by example, showing them how to endure without complaint. What he did not see was how they understood his quiet differently. To them, his restraint was not acceptance but sadness carefully folded away. They sensed his loneliness not as a permanent condition, but as something unfinished, something that could change if he allowed it. Their understanding of family extended beyond biology, shaped by the idea that people could choose each other through care and attention. As Elias reflected on his past, he realized how often unexpected kindness had arrived from places he least anticipated, usually when he had stopped looking for it. Status, romance, and certainty had never brought him peace, but presence had. His daughter's unwavering attachment reminded him that being chosen did not always come with grand declarations. Sometimes it arrived quietly, through those who stayed even when nothing was promised in return. Hope, he understood, was not reckless by nature. It became dangerous only when denied expression for too long. Elias had spent years believing that protecting himself meant limiting his future, mistaking survival for fulfillment. Yet something within him stirred as he watched his daughters, suggesting that redemption did not require rewriting the past, only reinterpreting it. Staying did not have to mean settling, and resilience did not have to mean isolation. The children interpret the silence differently than he does. Then conflict, and that disappointment often arrived without sound. What set them apart from the adults around them was openness. Where Elias guarded his reactions, the girls allowed themselves to feel freely, absorbing emotional cues without judgment. They did not interpret the moment as failure or rejection, only as transition. To them, the discomfort was not something to escape but something to respond to. Their shared glance carried years of unspoken communication, a mutual recognition that something important was slipping away. They did not need words to confirm it. Their understanding had already settled. Elias, meanwhile, felt resignation take hold with familiar ease. He accepted the moment as confirmation of what he already believed. That connection was temporary and expectation unnecessary. His inward focus shielded him from embarrassment but also from possibility. He remained seated, steady and contained, convinced that stillness was the most respectful response. What he did not see was how his quiet acceptance looked to his daughters, how it resembled surrender rather than strength. The girls watched him carefully, aware of the difference between endurance and isolation. They had grown up witnessing his resilience, his ability to stay when others left, but they also saw the loneliness that accompanied it. To them, family had never been defined solely by biology. It was built through presence, through choosing to remain emotionally available even when outcomes were uncertain. They believed and found family not as an idea but as a practice, something they lived every day with their father. As the silence stretched, Lily felt a subtle urgency. Mara mirrored it, saying that waiting would only allow the moment to pass unnoticed. They understood that unexpected kindness often mattered more than status or formality, that small gestures could redirect emotional outcomes. Without discussing it, they reached a shared conclusion, one formed through years of watching and learning. This was not a moment to retreat, but one to enter. Elias remained unaware of their decision as he reflected inwardly, convincing himself that staying quiet was the most dignified choice. He believed that protecting his daughters meant shielding them from emotional complexity, not realizing they had already mastered it. The girls, however, did not see complexity as danger. They saw it as opportunity, a chance to intervene not through words but through presence. Their chairs felt suddenly too far away. The distance between tables, once respectful, now seemed unnecessary. Lily noticed how the room's attention drifted elsewhere, leaving space for movement without disruption. Mara felt a calm certainty replace hesitation. Together they prepared to act, guided not by impulse but by empathy. They were not trying to change the outcome, only to acknowledge it, to bring warmth into a moment growing cold. Hope, for them, was not reckless. It was responsive. They believed that being chosen could begin with choosing, that redemption often started with small, quiet actions. As they shifted their weight forward, the girls carried with them everything they had learned about resilience, about staying present even when others withdrew. They did not know what would follow, only that remaining still felt wrong. The girls moved their chairs. Sometimes kindness refuses to let a moment end quietly. The decision the girls had made unfolded without announcement, yet it altered the shape of the room the moment it began. Lily reached for an empty chair with deliberate calm, the soft scrape against the floor drawing just enough attention to matter. Mara mirrored her, pulling another chair closer to the table, not as an interruption, but as an invitation. There was no urgency in their movements, no performance or insistence, only presence. The ending Elias had already accepted faltered, disrupted not by words but by action. The woman, Naomi, paused as she noticed the shift. Her body language changed subtly, the guarded composure she had carried loosening at the edges. She did not smile immediately or retreat further. Instead, she hesitated, caught between leaving and staying. The girl's quiet confidence unsettled her expectations, challenging the polite distance she had maintained. Their gesture carried no demand, no agenda, only an openness that felt unexpectedly safe. There was an absence of pressure that made the moment possible. The girls did not ask for attention or attempt to steer the conversation. They simply occupied the space, reshaping it through proximity. Their presence suggested that endings did not have to be abrupt, that pauses could be shared rather than endured alone. Elias felt that shift register before he understood it. A subtle reorientation of the emotional landscape he thought was already settled. For the first time that evening, he felt vulnerable in a way he had not prepared for. The careful control he maintained began to slip, replaced by an unfamiliar uncertainty. He had believed he was managing the situation with dignity, protecting himself and his daughters by accepting the inevitable. Now, their choice unsettled that certainty, revealing how little control he truly had over moments that mattered. Vulnerability arrived not as fear, but as exposure, a sense that something unplanned was unfolding. Children, he realized, had a way of reshaping emotional space without negotiation. They entered moments adults tried to exit, not to complicate them, but to humanize them. Lily and Mara did not see the table as a site of failure, but as a place still capable of connection. Their resilience was quiet yet insistent, born from years of watching their father stay steady through absence. They understood that staying did not always mean enduring silence. Sometimes it meant stepping closer. The initial awkwardness lingered, but it began to soften. The room felt warmer, less rigid, as if the tension had been acknowledged rather than avoided. Naomi's posture shifted again, her shoulders easing as she adjusted to the new arrangement. She looked at the girls with a curiosity that replaced distance, recognizing something genuine in their ease. Unexpected kindness, she realized, did not require status or explanation. It simply arrived, asking only to be received. Elias watched this transformation with quiet astonishment. The loneliness he carried, usually so contained, surfaced briefly, not as pain but as awareness. He saw how being chosen could happen in moments that defied planning, how found family extended beyond definitions he had relied on. His daughters were not protecting him from disappointment. They were inviting him into possibility. That realization unsettled him more than rejection ever had. The warmth that began to grow did not erase the uncertainty of the evening, but it reframed it. What had felt like an ending now resembled a pause, a space where something different might emerge. Elias remained silent, not out of resignation but attentiveness, allowing the moment to exist without forcing it toward resolution. He sensed hope stirring again, not loudly or recklessly, but with the quiet persistence he had nearly forgotten. Naomi stood there, her departure delayed, her certainty interrupted. The choice before her was no longer clear, complicated by the presence of two children who had changed the meaning of the moment. She looked at the table, at the chairs now filled, and weighed something beyond expectation. The ending Elias had accepted no longer belonged solely to him. The woman hesitates instead of leaving. Being included heals wounds judgment leaves behind. Naomi Hart had grown accustomed to feeling unseen in rooms where she was technically present. Long before this evening, rejection had taken quieter forms in her life, arriving as polite disinterest or emotional invisibility rather than explicit dismissal. Past relationships had taught her that effort did not always translate into belonging, and dating had slowly become an exercise in endurance rather than hope. She learned how to sit upright, how to smile at the right moments, how to accept that she was often being assessed rather than welcomed. So many of her experiences had carried the same underlying pattern. Conversations felt like evaluations, moments where she measured herself against expectations she could never quite identify. She was aware of how carefully she chose her words, how often she edited herself to seem agreeable or interesting enough. Dating over time had stripped warmth from connection, turning it into something transactional. She left most evenings feeling smaller than when she arrived, convinced that she had been weighed and quietly found lacking. That was why the girl's presence unsettled her in an unexpected way. Lily and Mara did not look at her as someone to be assessed. They did not seem curious about her achievements or her past. Their attention carried no agenda, only a gentle openness that required nothing from her. They accepted her presence as it was, without context or explanation. For the first time that evening, Naomi felt included rather than observed, welcomed rather than measured. She felt herself soften without resistance. The guarded posture she had maintained loosened, replaced by an ease she had nearly forgotten was possible. Her shoulders relaxed and the careful neutrality in her expression gave way to something more genuine. The girl's quiet acceptance created space for her to exist without performance. It reminded her of a time before dating felt like scrutiny, when connection began with curiosity rather than comparison. Across the table, Elias noticed the change even as he struggled to understand it. He felt a familiar fear rise within him, the fear that accompanied emotional hope whenever it dared to return. For years he had convinced himself that restraint was protection, that expecting less meant losing less. Watching Naomi soften challenged that belief, stirring a vulnerability he usually kept contained. He sensed that something meaningful was forming without intention, and that realization unsettled him more than rejection ever had. His daughters, meanwhile, remained steady, unaware of the magnitude of what they had initiated. To them, inclusion was instinctive, not strategic. They had grown up learning that people stayed when they felt chosen, and they offered that choice freely. Their understanding of family extended beyond blood, shaped by the quiet resilience of a home built on presence rather than certainty. They did not see Naomi as temporary or peripheral. only as someone who belonged in the moment they were sharing. The connection that began to form did so without effort or expectation. It was not driven by attraction or obligation, but by the simple recognition of shared humanity. Naomi felt her loneliness shift, not disappear, but loosen its grip. Elias felt the weight he carried lighten slightly, replaced by cautious curiosity. The room itself seemed to respond, the earlier tension giving way to warmth that did not demand resolution. Naomi realized how rare it felt to be part of something without needing to earn it. The girl's acceptance bypassed the defenses she had built over years of disappointment, offering her a glimpse of connection untouched by judgment. She found herself staying present instead of preparing to leave, allowing the moment to unfold rather than bracing for its end. That choice, small as it seemed, felt significant. Elias watched her with renewed attentiveness, aware that hope was no longer abstract. It had taken shape quietly, emerging through his daughter's instinctive kindness. He felt the familiar urge to retreat, to protect himself from disappointment, but he resisted it. Staying, he realized, did not always mean enduring loss. Sometimes it meant allowing something unexpected to grow. The evening no longer felt like a failed attempt or a final gesture. It had become something undefined, a space where possibility existed without promise. Neither adult had planned for this shift, and neither knew where it might lead. Yet both sensed that the moment had changed them, not through grand declarations, but through inclusion that asked nothing in return. The moment grows into something neither adult expected. Beginnings often arrive disguised as endings. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it changed everything. What had once felt like tension now softened into something resembling comfort, not because circumstances improved, but because resistance eased. The tightness that had filled the space between Elias and Naomi loosened, replaced by a quiet ease neither of them tried to define. The moment no longer demanded resolution. It simply asked to be inhabited. Lily and Mara remained at the table, their presence acting as an emotional bridge neither adult could have constructed alone. They moved naturally within the space, not forcing connection, but sustaining it through attentiveness. Their calm confidence grounded the moment, reminding both adults that safety did not require certainty. The girls did not attempt to fix anything, they simply stayed, and in doing so they transformed the atmosphere. The silence that once felt heavy now felt shared. Naomi began to feel something unfamiliar settle within her, a sense of being seen without scrutiny. The guarded parts of her, long accustomed to bracing against disappointment, slowly relaxed. She did not feel the need to explain herself or anticipate judgment. Instead, she felt permitted to exist as she was, present and unmeasured. That safety did not erase her past rejections, but it gave them less power, allowing her to experience the present without comparison. Elias noticed the change in her, and felt something shift within himself as well. For years, he had defined connection narrowly, believing it required certainty, alignment, and the absence of risk. Watching his daughters bridge the emotional distance so effortlessly forced him to reconsider that definition. Connection, he realized, could be quieter, built on presence rather than promise. It did not have to arrive fully formed. It could begin as simple willingness. Healing unfolded without announcement, free of expectations or guarantees. No one named what was happening, and that lack of definition made it possible. The evening no longer felt like an evaluation or a test. It felt like shared time, unclaimed by outcome. Elias felt the familiar weight of isolation begin to loosen, not because loneliness disappeared, but because it was no longer carried alone. Naomi sensed that shift too. The loneliness she had carried into the evening did not vanish, but it softened, reframed by the warmth of inclusion. She felt chosen in a way that did not demand reciprocity or performance. The girl's acceptance had opened a door she did not know she was waiting to walk through. It reminded her that belonging could exist without commitment, that being seen did not require being understood completely. Elias found himself present in a way he had not allowed in years. He was not projecting forward or retreating inward. He was simply there, attentive to the moment unfolding. The resilience he had built through years of single parenthood no longer felt like armor. It felt like foundation. Staying, he realized, did not always mean enduring disappointment. Sometimes it meant allowing hope to breathe, even if only briefly. The table that once symbolized emotional distance now felt like a place of quiet connection. Found family, Elias understood, was not something that replaced loss, but something that grew alongside it. His daughters had taught him that staying when others leave does not have to mean standing alone. It could also mean making space for unexpected kindness, even when it challenged long-held beliefs. Yet beneath the warmth, a familiar awareness lingered. Both adults knew how quickly moments could shift, how easily reality reasserted itself. Responsibilities waited beyond the walls of the restaurant, along with doubts shaped by past disappointment. The beginning that had emerged felt fragile, not because it was weak, but because it was new. Hope, once reintroduced, carried risk Elias and Naomi both remembered too well. Still, neither moved to end the moment. They allowed it to exist as it was, undefined and unpromised. The evening had already given them something unexpected, a reminder that connection could form without intention, that healing did not require declaration. For now, that was enough. Reality threatens to remind them why they stopped hoping. Fear speaks loudest when something finally feels real. As the warmth settled around the table, Elias felt an old unease surface, quiet but persistent. It arrived without invitation, carrying memories he had carefully organized and labeled as resolved. He had learned that moments like this often preceded disappointment, that calm could be temporary and connection fragile. The familiarity of that fear unsettled him more than the loneliness he knew so well. When something felt real again, his instincts warned him to retreat before it could be taken away. His thoughts drifted to the past, to times when hope had risen only to fall without explanation. He remembered how easily he had believed in permanence once, and how quickly that belief had been undone. The repetition of that pain had taught him caution, shaping a mindset where expectation felt dangerous. Sitting there now, with his daughters close and Naomi still present, he felt the tension between wanting to believe and needing to protect himself. Naomi felt a similar conflict unfold within her. The inclusion she had experienced moments earlier now gave way to uncertainty. She worried that she might be misreading kindness as intention, that she was assigning meaning where none was promised. Her history had taught her how easily warmth could be mistaken for commitment, how quickly hope could turn into self-reproach. She remained still, attentive, but inwardly cautious, aware of how vulnerable she felt in this unguarded space. Through it all, Lily and Mara remained emotionally consistent, their presence steady and unchanging. They did not fluctuate with the adults' doubts or withdraw in response to tension. Their calm reflected a belief that moments were worth staying in, even when outcomes were unclear. The girls had grown up learning that stability did not come from certainty, but from showing up repeatedly. Their quiet confidence anchored the table, offering reassurance without commentary. Elias felt himself caught between retreat and courage, a familiar crossroads he had faced many times before. Retreat promised safety, a return to emotional neutrality where disappointment could not reach him. Courage, however, required staying present without guarantees, allowing vulnerability to replace the armor he had worn for years. He watched his daughters, recognizing that they were not asking him to be fearless, only to be honest. That realization unsettled him, challenging his long-held definition of strength. Naomi sensed the shift in him, though neither named it. She noticed how his attention lingered, how he remained engaged rather than withdrawing into himself. It made her question her own impulse to pull back, to protect herself from imagined consequences. She realized that misinterpretation was not always failure, and that connection did not have to be defined immediately to be meaningful. The moment asked for presence, not projection. Slowly, Elias made a decision that surprised even him. He chose to stay emotionally present, resisting the urge to anticipate disappointment. He allowed himself to acknowledge the fear without obeying it, understanding that self-protection had kept him functioning, but also isolated. Vulnerability, he realized, did not erase resilience. It reframed it. Staying open felt risky, but it also felt honest, aligned with the life he wanted his daughters to witness. Naomi mirrored that choice in her own way, allowing herself to remain without rehearsing explanations or exits. She let the moment exist without demanding clarity, trusting that inclusion did not have to lead anywhere to be valid. The shared hesitation between them became a form of understanding, a quiet agreement to remain attentive rather than defensive. The table felt different now, not lighter, but truer. In that shared truth, something subtle changed. Elias saw Naomi not as a possibility to be evaluated, but as a person choosing presence despite fear. Naomi saw Elias not as someone guarded or distant, but as someone learning to stay. The realization altered how they perceived each other, shifting the moment from fragile to meaningful. It did not promise permanence, but it offered recognition, and that alone felt transformative. One realization changes how they see each other. Small gestures can rewrite entire emotional histories. The chair itself was ordinary, indistinguishable from the others in the room, yet its movement marked a turning point none of them could have predicted. What began as a quiet interruption became a reorientation of meaning, shifting the evening away from evaluation and toward possibility. The emotional transformation that followed did not announce itself dramatically. It unfolded through recognition, through the subtle recalibration of how each person understood themselves in relation to the others. For Elias, the moment loosened an identity he had worn for years. He was no longer defined solely by failed love or by the endurance that followed it. The narrative he had accepted, that connection was something he had already outlived, began to fracture. He realized that resilience did not have to be synonymous with solitude. Staying, he learned, could include allowing joy to approach without immediately preparing for its departure. The chair's movement had disrupted his resignation, revealing that his future did not have to mirror his past. Naomi experienced a similar release. The quiet inclusion she felt that evening softened the grip of rejection that had shaped her expectations. She was no longer viewing herself through the lens of what others might find lacking. Instead, she felt present, unmeasured, and sufficient. The absence of judgment allowed her to imagine connection without the familiar ache of anticipation. She did not feel chosen because she met a standard, but because she was welcomed as she was. The daughters watched these shifts with a clarity that surprised even them. Lily and Mara witnessed emotional modeling that affirmed what they had always believed intuitively. They saw adults choosing presence over retreat, honesty over performance. The moment reinforced their understanding that family could be formed through intention as much as circumstance. Their quiet act had created space for healing, and seeing its impact confirmed the power of empathy they carried so naturally. As the evening continued, a chosen family began to take shape, not as a declaration but as a practice. It was evident in the way attention lingered, in the shared understanding that no one was rushing to define what this moment meant. Found family, Elias realized, was not a replacement for what had been lost, but an expansion of what was possible. It was built through staying, through choosing not to withdraw when uncertainty appeared. Hope, once dormant, began to replace resignation. It did not erase caution or guarantee outcome, but it altered the emotional trajectory of the night. Elias felt lighter, not because his fears vanished, but because they no longer dictated his actions. Naomi felt steadier, grounded in the knowledge that inclusion could exist without promise. The girls felt affirmed, their instincts validated by the warmth that followed their choice. The chair had not saved the date in any conventional sense. There were no assurances, no sudden clarity about what would come next. What it changed was the future's tone. It transformed an ending into an opening, reminding each of them that moments did not have to conclude the way they began. The gesture had rewritten assumptions they carried about connection, teaching them that kindness could interrupt patterns long enough for something new to emerge. Elias reflected on how easily he might have missed this shift had his daughters not acted. He understood that his life had been shaped by staying through difficulty, but that staying through possibility required a different kind of courage. Naomi considered how rarely she allowed herself to remain present in moments that felt undefined. Both recognized that the evening had given them something rare, a shared experience untouched by expectation. The restaurant eventually began to empty, and the practicalities of leaving approached without urgency. None of them rushed. The time they shared felt complete without needing to be extended or explained. The transformation they experienced did not rely on continuation to be real. It had already changed how they saw themselves and each other. As they prepared to part, there was a quiet awareness that something lasting had begun, not because they promised it would, but because they allowed it to be. The chair's movement had altered their emotional histories, reminding them that the smallest actions could redirect entire narratives. What they carried forward from that evening was not certainty, but openness, and that felt like enough. What started as a goodbye becomes something lasting. If this story stirred something in you, it's because moments like these live quietly in our own lives too. Stories that stay with us are often the ones worth carrying forward and sharing. If you believe small choices can change emotional destinies, stay connected for more journeys like this. Now ask yourself, if you had been at that table, would you have stayed to change the moment, or walked away and let it end?